specific gut bacteria on colorectal cancer development in mice. Okay, we're done. Me. Wow. Stop doing this. Lots of this is taxpayer funded. Stop it. A science article published in r/science on Reddit goes to show just how unscientific human nutrition science is once again. What a shock. Really, I should have said an unscientific article published in r/not science was, well, exemplifying or has exemplified how unscientific human nutrition science is. So let's take a look at this. Diets low in carbs and fiber. So define low. What's the criteria? What's the cutoff? I've seen in these studies, sometimes it's 100 grams and below. Wow. Well, that's not exactly what I would consider low carb. But low in carbs and fiber, again, same question there. Alters gut microbes. So what? Obviously, that's going to happen because, well, your gut microbes and your gut microbiome are going to die, and also there will be new ones cultivated, depending on what you eat and what you don't eat. What a shock. To pretend like we know anything about the gut microbiome at all of any utility is to exhibit arrogance and to be completely lacking in self-awareness and humility. So, okay. And drives the growth, really drives, cause and effect statement. So can human nutrition science, which is based on descriptive statistics, and most of the time it's actually based off of inferential statistics as it's extrapolated with standard errors and confidence intervals and all that, can that science inform upon causality under any circumstances whatsoever? Because last I checked, no, it can't actually. Causality is an ideal that we strive to attain. While understanding, at least, while having the responsibility to understand that you will never attain it. Okay, so cool. Okay, drives the growth, right? Okay, of colon polyps. Okay, causing colorectal cancer. So it's another word with the causing there. Another causal word there. So irresponsible, and really what they should have said was that it was associated in the subset of the population studied during the duration, over the duration that the study actually went on for, with an incidence of colon polyps and colorectal cancer of a certain degree. So that also puts into question the strength of the association. And if it was a cohort study, then you must also answer the question of what the absolute differences were between the groups, which in human nutritional epidemiology is oftentimes tenths or hundredths of thousandths of incidence of whatever the primary outcome variable was, oftentimes death, mortality, per person per year of follow-up. So nothing actually is really what that translates to. So let's continue and let's just go on to open this little study here. Okay, so March 3rd of 2025, cool. Study uncovers how low carb diet drives, again with the word drives, so no, association does not equal causation. In fact, that is such a trite point. And I wish that it weren't trite, because the only reason it is trite is because of how often we have to say it. But it's such a critical point that I actually decided to make a shirt. It says association doesn't equal causation. And you can buy that if you haven't already in the description below. There's also another shirt that says indicated as because we like to be indicated when it comes to what we say, how we live, and how we eat, as opposed to contraindicated. If you have not bought this book already, by the way, second edition is out now. Link in the description below for paperback, hardcover, ebook, and self-narrated audiobook, because, as you know, my dear viewer, I'm all about authenticity. So, yeah, we like to be indicated when it comes to what we say. We like to be veracious, not voracious, veracious. Okay, so drives colorectal cancer development. We already covered that. All right. This is Temerity Medicine. Okay, University of Toronto. Toronto. By Betty Zhu or Zhao, whatever. Okay. Researchers from the University of Toronto have shown how a low carbohydrate diet Can, no, because can implies that it has been shown at least once to be causally involved in the development of the concerned outcome variable. It is yet again another causal claim. And if by can you really mean may, then, well, that also leaves may not. Can not. But they are two different words. Can worsen the DNA damaging effects, okay, effect being the conjugate of cause, so no, drawing more causal inferences from associative data, and not only is it associative, but also extremely weak associative data, okay, of some gut microbes. Oh, wow. Really? So now you have to provide us studies that actually prove unequivocally that these gut microbes are involved in DNA damage to cause colorectal cancer. Okay, so that's also based on another premise that is not necessarily true. Cancer is, look, I've done a multitude of videos on cancer before. I'll link one, critical one, in the top right corner of the screen that describes, it really elucidates how the common denominator of all cancer is mitochondrial DNA damage and a slowed rate of mitochondrial function. It is the common denominator. It does not necessarily mean that that is anything that causes mitochondrial DNA damage and or causes a slowing of the rate at which the mitochondria function is necessarily carcinogenic in the first place. So again, causality is an ideal, okay? So it doesn't necessarily prove that. But this is based on the premise that anything that even induces the slightest amount of DNA damage is a carcinogen. Not a potential carcinogen, a carcinogen. Well, that's interesting, because if that were the case, then you would have to say literally all food on the face of the planet is carcinogenic. Why? Because all food has deuterium in it to some degree, and deuterium above a certain concentration will slow the rate at which the mitochondria function in a cell. So literally any amount of deuterium and at any point, is that carcinogenic? Because that would literally mean that all food is carcinogenic. Oh, see how this gets really complicated? See how science isn't as definitive as people would like it to be and pretend it to be on a daily basis? Yeah. Again, I talked about my book, Contrainidicated. An entirely new book ought to be written about that, actually. But anyway, the study. Okay, so then they put a link to the study. Okay, so you know what? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and we're going to save this study. We're going to put it on standby. We'll review it, but I want to read the article first. Because oftentimes what happens is the article will say something about it, and it'll say enough for us to basically dismiss the study. And then what's even funnier is that when you actually go to when you go to the real study and you read the abstract and you read even just the methodology and all that, you realize that they actually left stuff out of the article that would make it seem even worse and even less utilitarian. So we're going to put it on standby. Dietary fiber counters the oncogenic potential. Yeah, oncogenes, right? Okay. So genes involved in cancer and all that stuff. The potential of colobactin producing Escherichia coli in colorectal cancer. Right, cool. Oh, and of course you have to pay to access it. We'll see if we can bypass that paywall when we get to it. Oftentimes I can, but okay. So the study published in the Journal of Nature Microbiology, cool, okay, compared the effects, nope, not effects, conjugative cause, and we already covered that. For any, if you are a statistics connoisseur or someone that's very interested in statistics, you might enjoy this little teaser of information as well, this little additional inkling of information. If you're thinking in terms of a linear regression, a scatter plot, y-axis, x-axis, with a line of best fit according to ordinary least squares regression analysis, you might be thinking, well, what if the R-squared value is 1? Wouldn't that equate to a causal relationship? No. Because there is always the possibility of a confounding and or spurious variable that has an equal effect on x and y that is causing them to be necessarily intertwined when they're not causally related, because if you remove that confounder from it, then they become completely unraveled. the funniest part is not even that fact alone. The funniest part is actually the converse of the statement is also false. That's the funniest thing. That's the funny thing about it. The converse of the statement, meaning if there is a causal relationship, then there is an association. That's also false. If there's an R-squared value of less than 1, that doesn't mean that there isn't a causal relationship, because there could be another spurious variable that interferes with the linkage, the causal linkage between X and Y. So in isolation, they could be necessarily intertwined. They could be causally linked. However, if there are other influences over that relationship, then the causal factor itself is no longer imposes an effect, it imposes an influence. This is like pH balance, for example. There's 4 independent variables of pH balance. Each of them in isolation have an effect on pH. However, when they're present in tandem with one another, they no longer provide an effect on it, they provide an influence over it. See how we're very careful with our wording? So, okay. That was for the erudite. The study published in the journal Nature Microbiology compared the effects of 3 different diets. Okay, so normal. What the hell is normal? Low carb, define that. Also, once again, define normal. Or Western style. Wait, so I would have thought that normal is Western style. Oh God, the noise already. The noise. Don't tell me it was on mice. Western style with high fat and high sugar. Okay, so what kind of fat too? So multiple confounding variables here. In combination with specific gut bacteria. Okay, so also, again, phenotypic predisposition here already in the cases studied. So what? Is it not the case that phenotype can influence the development of diseases and really your general affect according to additional stimuli that are imposed onto the organism? And I say phenotype, but also genotype as well. You know, the best way of determining what we ought to be eating and what we ought not to be eating is by finding our species-appropriate, species-specific diet across our genome that doesn't discriminate based on genotype. Because species-appropriate diets don't do that, do they? In any species observed. Specific gut bacteria. So did they also did they put these gut bacteria in the cases? Again, I'm hoping they're humans. Again, I haven't read this article, so I try and keep things authentic. Specific gut bacteria on colorectal cancer development in mice. Okay, we're done. Wow. So is a Western diet, or is it even a carnivore diet? Is a carnivore diet going to have the same effects on mice as it will in humans? Will it at all? Unfucking believable. Wow. Last I checked, mice in nature as observed are opportunist omnivores. Okay, they're also a lot different than human beings in many different ways as well. Unbelievable. Wow. So I genuinely think we're done. I really do think we're done. I would be. Let's keep going though. They found that a unique strain of E. coli bacteria, when paired with a diet low in carbs, again, what the is that diet? Look, we'll review the study ourselves in a little bit. And soluble fiber, right? So still indigestible, but able to be fermented more, okay, than as compared to insoluble fiber. Last I checked, though, fiber cannot be digested in human beings. And last I checked, if you can't digest something, you shouldn't be eating it, okay? So that's what I would say. However, it also seems to be, from other inferences, a contraindication itself. There's no deficiency disease that is observed in any human being studied for the duration of time that they've been studied that results from fiber abstention. Okay. It causes microabrasions to the gut lining, evinced by, actually demonstrated is probably a better word, demonstrated by studies that are touted to actually prove fiber's benefit or beneficial effects, ironically enough, in the studies that show that it's associated highly with increased mucus secretion. Yeah, last I checked, whenever some part of your body increases its rate of mucus secretion, it's because it's been irritated. Duh. What the hell are you talking about? It causes microabrasions to the gut lining. It is very highly associated with diverticulosis presentations, which is an outpouching or breaking down of the distal colon, which can lead to infection, diverticulitis, and early death if left untreated. The two associated factors when it comes to that are increased fiber intake and increased bowel motions per day. Those two going hand in hand. The more waste you eat, the more waste you excrete. Wow, someone should put that on a shirt too. I won't do it. I'll leave it up to you. The more waste you eat, the more waste you excrete. Anyway, and then all of the benefits that are touted to be benefits of fiber consumption are either completely ambiguous. In fact, like I just said, it would probably indicate, in our opinion, that it's actually not good for you to be eating. Or they can be attained by embarking upon a ketogenic carnivorous style diet. Like, short chain fatty acid production. Well, you can actually get that from eating them, first of all. And second of all, you can also produce beta hydroxybutyrate, by being in ketosis, because that's the primary ketone body produced in the liver. From acetoacetate, by the way, the other primary one. The third one is not very significant. It's acetone, which is also produced through acetate in the, I don't know if it's the capillary endothelium. It is in your bloodstream though. And the only time you'll get too much of that is whenever you're really having type 1 diabetes that's completely uncontrolled. And you can smell it on the breath because it smells fruity. Acetone itself is nail polish remover. So anyway, drives the growth of polyps in the colon, which can be, okay, so really in this situation, you mean maybe a precursor to cancer. Okay, so you actually didn't even establish that there was any cancer development in the mice. So it was done on mice with diets that are completely unnatural for the mice to be consuming. They're also unnatural for humans to be consuming. And also you didn't define what the diets were in the article. You never specified in this article, you haven't yet, the duration of the study in the first place. They're also done in mice that are genotypically and phenotypically different from each other and have already lived a life before this. They're more controlled than human beings can be, I'll give you that, but notice how I just listed a bunch of uncontrolled variables still? Me. Wow. And also, the cherry on top was that you saw some unique strain of E. coli bacteria in these mice guts. Oh, yeah. Guts. Gut microbiome. But yeah, side note, by the way, they never even specified the sample size either. So what was the statistical power on that one? But anyway, blah, blah, blah. They also didn't even see a development of cancer. They just said, it may be a precursor to it. So yeah, this is human nutrition science. Do you enjoy it? Do you like it? Do you find it utilitarian at all? Yeah, okay, me neither. Colorectal cancer has always been thought of as being caused by a number of different factors. Well, they are. All cancer is. Okay, even the UV rays from the sun have influence over cancer development. I guess you could say they may have, because of the fact that they, above a certain amount, will cause DNA damage to mitochondria. Wow, does that mean that you shouldn't be engaging in sunlight exposure, though? See how nuanced this whole conversation is surrounding cancer? Unbelievable. Gut microbiome. Yeah. Okay, so including diet. Yeah, gut microbiome. I would say diet more so, because diet is really going to be the most intimate stimulus to your genes than anything else, which is why we put so much emphasis on diet in the space. Gut microbiome, environment, and genetics. Yeah, so yes, says senior author Alberto Martin, a professor of immunology at University of Toronto's Temerty Faculty of Medicine. So let me ask, does he actually understand how to conduct science and statistics and interpret statistics? Our question was, does diet influence the ability of specific bacteria to cause cancer? Well, they very well may. They also very well may not. I tend to believe the former. However, I also tend to, I absolutely know that you can't form upon this bull. So at least in this area, you can make some other inferences. You can outsource them elsewhere, but you're not doing that. You did not provide sufficient evidence to answer your question with this study. Sorry, Alberto. To answer this question, no, to attempt to do so. The researchers led by postdoctoral fellow, nope, not even trying with that, examined mice that were colonized with one of 3 bacterial species that had been previously associated with. So what was the strength of the association? And what was the sample size that you were basing the inference off of? So therefore, what was the signal to noise ratio? What was the distribution of the random variable concerned? In the population, was it normally distributed in the first place? If not, what was the median presentation of the variable in the first place? Plus or minus what in terms of the incidence rate? And once again, yes, the strength of the association. And fed either a normal, low-carb, or Western-style diet. So still not defining that in the article. Perhaps that was due to brevity for the sake of it. I don't know. We'll get to it when we actually get into the study. Only one combination, a low-carb diet paired with a strain of E. coli that produces the DNA-damaging compound colobactin, led to the development of colorectal cancer. So how did they determine that it was DNA-damaging? Because here's a question. Did they find this out by cultivating basically employing a cell culture type study where they either put a cell in a petri dish or in a vial, a test tube, and then saturate it with the compound for 24 hours after rinsing it with a bunch of antibiotics and saline? Did they do that? Because if that's the case, no, you didn't establish it was DNA damaging either, did you? Unfucking believable. DNA damaging compound colobactin led to the development of colorectal cancer. So, did they see the development of colorectal cancer? Because in the previous claim, it sounded like they didn't. So, okay. Oh, wow. A bunch of bread and circuses, basically playing in a toy box. This is what this is. It's nothing of utility. I guess it does have utility. It allows me to debunk this and expose them for what they're really doing. So actually, in a way, keep it up. But no, in reality, I don't want them to keep it up. I want them to stop. Today! The researchers found that a diet deficient in fiber, deficient, that implies that there's a requirement for it. How long have our genes evolved to genotypically withstand any significant amount or any at all of fiber to any form, in any form? From every inference we have, observational paleoanthropology, chemical anthropology, comparative anatomy, biochemistry. None? Like not long enough, really? Yeah, so deficient. Nope, not deficient. Maybe in mice, I guess. I don't know. In fiber, increased inflammation in the gut. Okay, according to whom, on the basis of what? By what metrics? And even so, okay, it was associated actually with increased inflammation, because who's to say that it was actually the result of fiber or the diet in the first place in the gut, and altered the community of microbes. Okay, so what? Again, we already covered that in the beginning. Typically reside there. So what? Creating an environment that allowed the colobactin producing E. coli to thrive. So what? So what? Is it also not the case that the gut microbiome adapts over long periods of time of being exposed to a different diet? Is it not the case that you can't extrapolate findings that were found and derived from a snapshot in time to, first of all, an entire population, but also to an entire time frame that wasn't studied? Can you extrapolate the results of a study beyond the tenure of the study? Part of the tenure involving the duration of the study? Can you do that responsibly? Because the key word is responsibly. You can do whatever the fuck you want, and they do it, in fact. But is it responsible to do so? Nope. So, cool. Yep. They also showed that mice fed so again, key word there. Look at that. Let's just zoom in on that. Let's just zoom in, okay? Mice. Cool. Yep. They also showed that mice fed a low-carb diet had a thinner layer of mucus separating the gut microbes from the colon epithelial cells. Oh, wow. Interesting. Perhaps that's actually a good thing. Because again, mucus serves to protect our cells, right? Serves to protect them. But the more you have, that's a sign of irritation, right? When you get a runny nose, for example, that's a sign of irritation. Often happens when people eat spicy food. Hint, hint, wink, wink. You shouldn't be eating it, should you? Okay. You also have to clear your throat when you eat spicy food a lot of times. You also get gastric upset. It also literally hurts to eat. You ever think about any of that? Maybe because plants are toxic. There's a toxicity spectrum that they exist within. I'm not pretending like that's not the case. There's nuance with every conversation, okay? But there's a clear sign to stay away from the thing, but instead, we condition ourselves to enjoy it. All right. The mucus layer acts as a protective shield between the bacteria and the gut and the cells underneath. Yes. Cool, great. With a weakened barrier, well, now hold on, because that's not, that's begging, well, it's begging a question. However, it's not a begging the question fallacy. I recently learned that, and it throws me off all the time. It's not a begging the question fallacy. But it does beg a very important question. It's based on a premise that I reject entirely, or at least I question it. Okay, that may or may not be correct. All right, is it weakened, or is it just weaker? And also, yeah, that's the other key. Weakened is another cause and effect statement. However, the way they phrased it wasn't implying a causal relationship. I will be fair to them in that regard. Anyway, blah blah. With a weakened barrier, more colobactin could reach the colon cell. Could see that word? Could. So it wasn't observed. Could reach the colon cells to cause genetic damage and drive tumor growth. Right. So it also could not. Great. Thanks for telling us that. These effects, nope, were especially strong in mice with genetic mutations in the mismatch repair pathway that hindered their ability to fix damaged DNA. Right, so are mice humans? And also, what else were they eating? And what else were they not eating? And what else were they doing? And what else were they not doing? Okay, same questions apply here, even though there was more control exerted, because this was in a laboratory setting. Well, both Blatt and Martin emphasized the need to confirm these findings in humans. Wow. Cool, and even if they were, many questions are left unresolved. They are also excited about the numerous ways in which their research can be applied to prevent cancer. Could be, and really this isn't enough. It's unbelievable that this is even looked at with any degree of seriousness. Okay. Defects in DNA mismatch repair are frequently found in colorectal cancer. So frequently found is an association, but yes, okay, fine. The association is incredibly strong. And there seems to be something causal there with dysfunctional DNA and cancer development, or at least cancer incidence, which is the fourth most commonly diagnosed cancer in Canada. Great. That sucks. An estimated 15% of these tumors having mutations in mismatch repair genes. Right. Okay. So now it's actually the least of them that have been observed that have the mutation. Good. Mutations in these genes also underlie Lynch syndrome, a genetic condition that significantly increases a person's risk. Nope. Is associated with an increased incidence of statistical significance. That's what they meant to say. Of developing certain cancers, including colorectal cancer. Cool. So not developing either. Presentations of. Keyword. Can we identify which Lynch syndrome patients harbor these colobactin-producing microbes, asks Martin. Can we identify which Lynch syndrome patients harbor these colobactin-producing microbes, asks Martin. He notes that for these individuals, their findings suggest that avoiding a low-carb diet or taking a specific antibiotic treatment to get rid of the colobactin-producing bacteria could help reduce the risk of colorectal cancer. Yeah, they also could not. Great, cool. This is a study. I don't even know why I'm continuing to read this, but we're almost done. Martin points out that a strain of E. coli called Nissel, which is commonly found in probiotics, also produces colobactin. Ongoing work in his lab is exploring whether long-term use of this probiotic is safe for people with Lynch syndrome or those who are on a low-carb diet. Blank is keen to follow up on an interesting result from their study showing that the addition of soluble fiber to the low-carb diet was associated with lower levels of the cancer-causing, not cancer-causing, you don't have any evidence to support that claim, that's your opinion. E. coli, less DNA damage, and fewer tumors. Cool. We supplemented fiber and saw it reduced, not reduced, not the effects, because that's again the conjugative cause of the low-carb diet. Again, what was the low-carb diet? We'll get into that. He says, now we are trying to find out which fiber sources are more beneficial. Beneficial is another cause and effect statement, so you should have said beneficial in your opinion, or associated with less disease process outcomes, and which are less beneficial. So again, same thing there. To do this, Blank and Martin are teaming up with Heather Armstrong. Oh, good. A researcher at the University of Alberta. Oh, good. To test whether supplementation with a soluble fiber called inulin, yes, can reduce, well, can be associated with less incidence of colobactin producing E. coli and improve gut health in high-risk individuals. Nope, not high risk at all, like people with inflammatory bowel disease. So really, I should say not, I shouldn't say not high risk. I should say there's no evidence to support the claim that they're high risk or low risk. Like people with inflammatory bowel disease. Our study highlights the potential dangers associated with okay, see that word potential? So at the end, they were a little responsible there. Associated with long-term, define long-term, long is a value judgment statement, it's a relative term. Use of a low-carb, low-fiber diet, so all of them. So even the one that was studied, even if the one that was studied was approximating what I would tend to believe is the most indicated diet for human beings across the board to be consuming, you're going to extrapolate the results found with the employment of that diet to all low-carb, low-fiber diets? All of them? Yeah, so another irresponsible extrapolation there. That's what we call in logic a faulty generalization or hasty generalization fallacy. Okay. Very, very, very adjacent to the composition fallacy, which is the more logical structure focused fallacy, which is the idea that what is true of parts is true of the whole, such as the idea that parts of a plane are light in weight, so the whole plane must be light in weight. So again, anyway, whatever. Which is a common weight reducing diet. Yes, says Martin. It's also, depending on which one you choose, the species appropriate, species specific diet for human beings to be consuming across the board with very minimal variation, given our ubiquity for the last 13,000 years. I'll give people that. Okay. Cool. More work is needed, but we hope that it at least raises awareness. You know what? I disagree with this. More work is needed. No, less of it is needed. Stop doing this. Lots of this is taxpayer funded. Stop it. Stop today. Okay? Stop playing with toys, because that's what this is doing. That's what you're doing here. This research was funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. Unbelievable. Okay, great. So that was the article. Now let's look at the study. Okay. Dietary fiber count. We already read the title. Diet, microbiome, inflammation, and host genetics have been linked to colorectal cancer development. Linked is a associative claim. Good. However, it is not clear whether and how these factors interact to promote carcinogenesis. Great. Here we use a certain type of mice colonized with bacteria. So they introduce bacteria into them. Basically, effectively. I mean, it wasn't like a surgical thing. They colonized them through certain indirect means. Colonized with bacteria previously associated with colorectal cancer, enterotoxigenic bacteroides fragilis. Okay, this also completely neglects to understand the fundamental idea that bacteria, the effects of bacteria in the body, the way that they behave, is dependent on the terrain in which they're placed. Okay? Anyway, Helicobacter hepaticus or colobactin producing. Okay, I don't care. Normal chow diet. Good. Colonic polyposis. Yeah, so they still don't clarify what this is. Colonic polyposis was increased in mice colonized with blah, blah, blah. E. coli and fed. Mechanistically, mucosal inflammation was increased in the LC. Okay, some more associations with a bunch of assumptions. Signaling and increased luminal nitrate levels. Cool. Nope, not increased. Done. This promoted both blah, blah, blah. Growth. Supplementation with dietary soluble fiber in the form of inulin, reverted inflammatory and polyposis phenotypes. PKS E. coli also induced more polyps in mismatch repair deficient mice. So more use of words like that imply causality. Right, so no information provided here. So let's go ahead and cite the article by finding the DOI and try and bypass this paywall so we can really get into the methodologies, the granular details, because that's the abstract. We don't like just reading the abstract. So let's hope that we can actually access this. Colby, don't show the site that I'm on. Don't. Okay, so they don't have the requested document. It's not available, maybe because it's too new. So anyway, we're done. That means we're done. That means that we're done. So this is the state of science today. Science. It's theology. It's basically bread and circuses. It's playing with toys in a toy box. It's basically being involved in a sandbox and messing around and building sandcastles and toppling them down. It's just frivolous. It's trivial. It means nothing. And also, it's a siloed area of science that completely ignores all of the other highly abundant areas of science that can provide more judicious and strong inferences, more informative inferences about what we ought to be doing, how we ought to be living, how we ought to be eating as human beings. And that logic in those fields can be extrapolated to, well, every animal, according to the Darwinian principles of evolution. So there we go. So anyway, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'm not quite sure what you're doing, frankly. I'm not quite sure. But let's change that. Also hit the bell notification. I've actually never really instructed people to do that before. But go ahead and do that too for your own benefit. Also leave your thoughts in the comment section below. And once again, buy my book, Contrainidicated, if you haven't already, a closer look and revision of mainstream health axioms that have perpetuated illness, disorder, and disease for over a century. If you would like to learn more about my positions on diet, lifestyle, if you'd like to learn more about, my story, how I arrived here, etc., etc. And also subscribe to the Patreon if you haven't already to gain access to 1 week early uploads, ad-free content, uncensored content, loads of Patreon exclusive uploads whenever I used to be doing such a thing, providing such a thing, and also loads of antiquated videos that precede, my public appearance, by the way. And also, finally, the link on the bottom of the screen. What is that link? Well, that is a link that will bring you to an amazing site with amazing products from an amazing brand known as Cerule. If you purchase product through that link, you will get a permanent percentage discount and permanent free shipping when signing up for monthly deliveries. And if you email me behind the scenes at edgoki@pm.me, I can tell you how to earn those products for free. Because who in their right mind wouldn't want that? But of course, before buying any products at all, including these ones, I would not recommend doing so until you actually learn about the things. So, fortunately for you, I have a way for you to learn exactly what these products are, who should take them, why you should take them, when to take them, etc., etc. Linked in the top right corner of the screen, a Cerule Products video. And I also have an additional video, if you migrate to the description below, that you can find that basically elucidates these products in further detail, as well as the company of Cerule itself, which I think is incredibly important if you're willing to actually contribute to the company with a purchase. So, with that being said, join me next time when we're reviewing more science. Having to employ basic logic, basic scientific rigor in order to refute all of the claims that are made from such science, and also to refute the methodologies themselves. So, till then.